this is just another part of being human. It's like our digestion, our bones, our muscles, our respiratory system. Our sexuality is just another part of our whole. I think it's really interesting the way we can still be living in a culture that is really sort of positive and encouraging and embracing of the sexual part of being human, and at the same time still have the things from our past that we need to work through. And actually, I'm just saying work through. I think it's more that we need to love and care for so that we can progress to give our children something new and something different and something better.
Welcome to The Body Never Lies. I'm your host, Leela Lutz. Each week, myself and experts from around the world help you uncover the secret ways your body communicates with you to empower you in your own individual health journey. Now, I don't think that we can really get in tune with our body to understand how it never lies until we can get comfortable with talking about it. All the parts of our body relay messages to us about the state of our physiology, our nervous system, our digestive system, our musculoskeletal system, and so does our reproductive system. For instance, a man might have problems with erections or ejaculation because of a spinal disc injury or nerve compression, or because of inadequate calories or glucose dysregulation, thyroid hormone conversion, or emotional and financial stress. A woman's vaginal mucus and its changes can tell her if she has adequate progesterone, which is an anti-anxiety, anti-inflammatory, immune-enhancing recovery hormone. And as a coach, I can use all this information to know whether my exercise and nutrition program is enhancing or decreasing physiology for performance. So how do we get comfortable with talking about these parts of our bodies? How do we get comfortable with seeing them as more than the cultural labels and functional labels of sex, and how do we move past the connotations behind those labels? Sarah Sproule is an occupational therapist with a master's in sexuality studies and a host of the fabulous podcast Sitting in a Car, where she helps parents stay connected with their kids while having conversations about puberty, bodies, and sex. I love Sarah's work because she's an influencer and an experienced practitioner in this space of changing our thoughts, our programming, our beliefs, and getting in touch with why it is so important to have these conversations about our bodies, not only with our kids, but ourselves. Sarah Sproule, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you for coming on The Body Never Lies.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be invited. It's a great honour. Thank you.
So in talking about our bodies, because I truly believe that the body never lies, something that I've had to help clients get really comfortable with is talking about their bodies. And it's a big thing that I see is that we've become so disconnected from our bodies that we feel uncomfortable about what it does and how to talk about it. But then even deeper, we sort of ignore it in a way because there's a shame around it, or, and I'm not talking... I've got another guest coming on, Laura Bright, and we talk about how the pill is how your menstrual cycle is a measure of your health. But there are quite a lot of women who don't even know their menstrual cycle. And if I ask them a question like, what's your mucus like throughout your cycle? They kind of, some of them are a bit sort of uncomfortable because they're like, well, that's the icky stuff, And some of them are like, well, I've never looked. And some of them are like, oh, it's interesting the reactions that we have. And I've become so removed from it, right, because I talk about this stuff every day and I'm using it. So I really wanted you to come on the show today to talk about how do we get comfortable with our bodies, no matter what stage we are in our life, and then how do we talk to our children about it so they can have a different experience of the world that a lot of us have had.
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I think what's wonderful about I have the great privilege of working with parents who want to talk to their children about the body, puberty, sexuality, and these parents are wanting these conversations with their kids to give them the skills that they didn't get or the support that they didn't get growing up. So it's sort of like this moment in time where our generation, the generation of parents right now, are looking to our children and going, shame about sex and bodies and all the things, it stops now. This stops now. I want to change the way my child grows up. And it will be a lot about how do they get comfortable with their body? How do they accept their body for who they are? How are they able to speak up for the things they need in relationships, in sexuality, even in healthcare to do with their sexual self? It's a wonderful opportunity to improve and change things for the kids we are raising. It's an exciting time.
It is really exciting, isn't it? And I think what's really important to note, when you do learn to get comfortable with your body and tune into its sign, you can really own it. And you can be empowered about it, and you can say something happens to you, like you have candida, which I know when I was a teenager growing, when you had thrush and it was like, oh, that's disgusting, you've got an itchy vagina and it's, whatever people thought about it. Whereas now it's like, well, maybe that's a dietary problem that we could have a look at, and it's just a sign from your body that something's out of balance. Let's do something about it. And I really want women to feel like that, and their partners to feel like that, and men can get it too, by the way. So, for them to feel like, oh, well, maybe my body's telling something and I should do something about it. And just because it's a part of my body that's used in sex, it doesn't mean it's, associated with that can't talk about it kind of topic. So I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. How do we start? Where do we start?
Oh, where do we start? Well, I suppose I'd like to comment on something that you said about in your work, which is that you, I think you said you help people get in touch with their body, and how does their body, what did you say, inform their understanding of their physiology?
Give them information,
Yeah. Well, I do a similar sort of thing. Like when parents come to me and they're saying, look, I want to be able to talk about, I want to be able to use the correct terms for the genitals, for example. Then we start actually with the parent's body and we say, okay, well, what does your body tell you about those words at the moment? Like, is your body telling you that they're dangerous or wrong or bad or sort of sinful maybe, or dirty? So we are also tapping into our body to work out, why do we have the habits we have at the moment as parents? And oftentimes it will be because, and I'll use the pronoun our because I have been through this myself. Our body will be telling us that things to do with sexuality is either dirty, bad, wrong, sinful, something that has to be hidden away. And it does that because it's trying to keep us safe. And the reason our nervous system thinks anything to do with sex is dangerous and all that thing is because when we were small, the sort of adults or the culture around us was telling us those things. Don't talk about sex. Don't ask me questions about, why does my vulva have pubic hair? Because, we don't talk about those things. And so our nervous system is really just going on the information that it was given. It's like a computer program that it was programmed not to talk about these things to keep ourselves safe. So that's what it does. And so when a parent wants to change all that, we go back to the body first of all, and we look and say, okay, and start learning about, well, why is this habit here and what can we do to change it?
It's really always comes back to self, right? You have to really look about how you feel about something before you can start pushing it on to others around you or trying to change others around you. And it's so true what you said about it's very culturally influenced. And I think when we live in such multicultural societies, we have to have empathy for that. So I love how you talk about that in your post as well. Like, we're not just who we are now, we're where we've come from generationally, culturally. So
I had a client going through my program earlier in the year, and she is Irish, but she lives in Denmark. And I don't know if anyone knows about Denmark, but they've got a really good system of sexuality education, and children are raised with a real sort of open understanding of that part of being human. And she's married to a Danish guy and they're raising 3 children. She's Irish though. And so just because she now lives in Denmark doesn't mean automatically that cultural influence she can just adopt it because she's got all these decades of influence from growing up in Ireland. And even though she told me, like, her mum was a nurse, and so she got a lot of practical information, there was still a lot of influence of shame, even at school around periods. You didn't talk about periods. They were shameful. You didn't show even your friends if you had your period and you were trying to change your pad or whatever it was back then. So she actually joined the program because she wanted to be a part of parenting her children to join in with what the culture was telling them. She didn't want to be left behind, and so there was a certain amount of work and education that she needed to do. But she said at the end how amazing it was once her mind was freed up about how this is just another part of being human. It's like our digestion, our bones, our muscles, our respiratory system. Our sexuality is just another part of our whole. And I think once she realized that, it was amazing how she noticed how her children were saying more things to her. She wasn't necessarily starting more conversations, though she might have been doing that as well, but she was just open to the sort of opportunities that the world was bringing her, just as she was raising 3 kids and her eldest was only 6. So I think it's really interesting the way we can still be living in a culture that is really sort of positive and encouraging and embracing of the sexual part of being human, and at the same time still have the things from our past that we need to work through. And actually, I'm just saying work through. I think it's more that we need to love and care for so that we can progress to give our children something new and something different and something better.
It's such a good use of language there, I think, changing it from work to love and care for something. And I think a lot of this stuff can be quite unconscious as well, because we don't realise how unconscious our cultural and religious and generational programming can be. And when people say, oh, what do you mean? Like, I say, well, for instance, a lot of non-religious people get married, but they don't realise that marriage is a Christian act of Christianity. So you might not think that you are influenced by religion, but you generally are in some way, shape or form. So I know for me, my mum she's Indian, Sri Lankan. And so for a woman in her culture, she was living in Malaysia at the time, when she got her first period, no one talked about it. She didn't know what it was. And no one talked about it. And she was locked in a room. She was whisked away, locked in a room for the week until it was over, because it's unclean. And, so then when her family, her father and her brother didn't know where she was, and no one could tell them where she was and what she was doing, because you're not supposed to talk about it. So it was like, so that's where she's come from. And so there's also been quite a history of sexual abuse in my family. So I had this very interesting upbringing where my mum had a nursing background, so she was very comfortable talking to me about my body in terms of its function, but anything to do with sex, she actually set up for me lots of things around protection and protecting yourself, because there's been an abuse in my family, and also that, we don't talk about certain things with other people because they're not clean, because that was her culture. So I had to go and do a little bit of love and care, I was going to say, for myself, to change that narrative for myself, to be able to have the relationship that I have now and do the work that I have to do. So, I guess, what are your tips for people in that situation, Sarah, and making a start to overcome their own hesitancy or blockages around connecting with their own body?
I think one of the first things is this play on words that we're doing right now between work and love and care. And the first thing is to acknowledge that whatever we've been given in our growing up, it's not our fault. It's just a product of the luck of the draw of, where we were born, what family we were born into, and the experiences that family had in their past before we came along. So it's almost like, this sort of sense of it's okay. I didn't do this to myself. I'm not bad. I'm not wrong. These things have happened, right? And then there's a matter of also taking pressure away from ourselves. So oftentimes the narrative will be where we sort of feel like maybe we're a bit broken, that we have to like work really hard. And with that comes this sort of feeling of guilt and maybe shame that we're not being the most evolved human or the best parent we could be, or someone down the road is doing a better job talking to their kids about this sensitive stuff, or that woman we've seen in the bar, she looks like she's much more in touch with her sexual self than I am, so I feel bad and guilty and wrong. Or my friend tells me that they're having sex 4 times a week in their marriage and I'm not having sex at all in my marriage, or only having it once a month or whatever. So there's all this judgment that is just there, right? So how could it be possible to put the judgment over to the side, not deny that it's there, because of course it's going to be there, because our culture is so like, sex is, you've got to do it right, and there's right ways to do sex, and there's, all that stuff. So move that over to the side and say, okay, I know the judgment is there, and I know the culture that I live in and the world I live in puts a lot of, like I call them super secret lies or super secret messages about the right way to do things. Just put that over to the side for a minute and just spend some time with myself and go, you know what? It's hard to break patterns. It's hard to challenge maybe generations of silence. And at the same time, how can we be so proud of ourselves that we're even considering this as an idea, right? Because that is actually massive, to have the awareness that I would like to change things, whether I'm changing them for myself or my child. That is huge. That is huge. And so then it comes down to, well, what is the gentlest, most kind, most loving way to do this for myself? And I think that's where people like yourself, Leila, who are challenging the culture around things that are very deep-seated, and I'm doing it in terms of sexuality and conversations with children come in, because no one should have to do this on their own. I mean, how long have you studied to get to the point where you are in terms of like reading and researching and watching your body and working with other people's bodies? How long have I been doing that to hone this craft, right? And so any parent that comes to me and expects themselves to be able to just sort of like snap their fingers like this and say, okay, now I'm going to be talking to my child, it's inherently such an act of unkindness that anyone would expect themselves to be able to challenge all that stuff in the blink of an eye without support. So the point I'm making is about how can we get kind, loving, gentle, compassionate support to move ourselves along this journey, right? So you see how there's that thread of just kindness, constant kindness, because particularly when you're working in sexuality, what I notice is that, consent is this big thing at the moment. It's become really sort of like a current issue of our time, which is awesome. But consent also needs to come into our parenting and into the way we treat ourselves, right? So if I'm saying to myself, I have to do this thing for my child, I have to have this conversation, they need it, right? While that is true, our kids really do need conversations from us so that they feel supported by the adult who loves them the most. At the same time, there's this other part of it, which is caring for ourselves and not treating ourselves harshly, because when we treat ourselves harshly, that's non-consent. It would be almost like saying to ourselves, come on, you have to have sex now with this person because all the sexuality educators say that having sex is good, and having sex in the missionary position is the best way to do it. And this is the best way to have an orgasm, when most of us, I hope, would know that missionary position isn't the best way to have sex, and everyone has orgasms in a different way, and it would be inherently unkind for us to try and have an orgasm the same way the person next to us and the person next to us and the person next to us has one, right? And it's exactly the same thing in the parenting space to do with these conversations about sex. We are all going to come at it from a different perspective, and it's a kind, consensual, gentle thing to work out with help what is the best way for you to do it and what is the best way for your kid.
It really is tuning in, isn't it, and seeing how you feel about it. And I like what you were talking about before we started talking. We were talking about tuning into the feelings that you have, the anxiety or the stress or whatever's going on, and looking at where that comes from, right, and working through that rather than forcing yourself to do something that you're not ready to do.
Go ahead.
No, I was listening to one of your posts the other day, and I found it so interesting because I was doing something with my daughter. So I want to move on to now, like, when we start talking about with our kids, right? Because I think we have this concept as parents that, because milestones are pushed onto us so much, right? By this age, you should be able to do this, and by this age, you should be able to do this, and da-da-da-da. And we've talked about a lot with one of our other guests, Fern. We talk about toileting. It's something that you think, well, now you can just go to the toilet. You're 3 years old or 2 years old, and you need to go to nursery, so we're going to lock you inside for the week, and we're going to go to the toilet by the end of the weekend. And she was actually saying, well, actually, going to the toilet is a lot more than that. I have to learn to take my pants off. I have to learn to wipe myself. I have to learn to climb onto the toilet. There's so many things that we can teach our kids in the years leading up to when they're ready to go to the toilet. And I think there's a lot of body confidence that comes in with that. It's all about autonomy, and it's the first time they're responsible for their own body. That's what she said. And I thought, wow, that's actually really true. But then you were talking about, we can talk about vaginas with our children when they're first born, like when they're little. And I was like, wow, this follows the values that I really learnt from Fern about parenting and how we set up foundations and build on things rather than go, right, now you are 14, let's have the talk.
Yes.
So how do we do it? So we don't have to have that moment, the talk. How do we start from the beginning and, get our kids comfortable from their body, with their body from the start?
I sort of use an analogy of teaching table manners, that we don't all of a sudden one day sit down with our kids and go, okay, we're going to learn table manners today. This is the one day we're going to learn it, and that's the way it goes. We, over time, sort of following their developmental arc, slowly put things in place. So, when they're weaning, they're eating with their hands, and then slowly they might move up to a spoon, and we're still putting down the plastic sheet, and then slowly we're teaching them how to keep the food, on the tray and then on the plate, and then we slowly move on. So it's the same thing with conversations about the body and the sexual self, that we can start off. So usually in sex education, we've got different sort of blocks of time. So the first one is 0 to 4. And in 0 to 4, we're getting our child used to their body, what it looks like, that it's theirs and they have autonomy over it. So they, that it's their own thing and they get to make decisions about it, what things are called, we also need to talk about, well, what behavior is okay in public places and in private places. So, when we're changing nappies on the nappy change table, then, we're in a private space and we're talking to them about, oh, that's your penis or that's your vulva, and I'm wiping the poo away, and or whatever word you want to use for it. And we're sort of we're using the language, and we're getting comfortable. It's not just about giving them something. We're learning how to say these words and talk about this stuff when they're small and they don't really sort of know what's happening. And so we're conditioning ourselves to feel comfortable with it. In terms of knowing that their body is their own, we can say, oh yeah, that's your stomach. And we can talk about how bodies are meant to feel good. Like one of our body does feel good, right? And there are things we learn about our body that feels better than other things. So some children, they love to run. You'll notice that they just love to run. And when they're in the park or whatever, they run. Some kids like to sit down and touch the grass. Some children like to swing on the swing, whatever it is. And so we all start learning from a really early age what feels nice on our body. And as a parent, we can be a commentator of that. And by describing what we see our children doing, bring into their awareness that, oh yeah, I do like this thing. Not everyone likes it, but I like it. Right. And so can you see how that's starting to become a building block for learning that everyone is different in all parts of their body and their humanity, which translates over into their sexual self way later on when they're trying to work out, well, what sort of things do I like to do when I share my body? We can do simple things like that, the toilet training you described. Like we can be talking about the fact that how many openings does our body have around our hips? So you might have a penis on your body and therefore you have 2 openings. Did you know that? You've got 1 opening for poo and 1 opening for wee. Oh, that's really interesting. Or you have a vulva on your body. That means you have 3 openings. It's really interesting. You have 1 for poo, 1 for wee, and you have 1 other opening that goes to a special place in your body called the uterus. Or whatever. And you just sort of like layer on the information very slowly, using the right words. So you don't have to get back to using the right words when they're 7, 8, or 9. You just start from the beginning. And some people say to me, oh yeah, but sometimes I use slang words. And I'm going, well, actually, that's okay too, because think about it. In our world, we have lots of different microcultures, let's call it. So we have the microculture of what it's like to sit in an upmarket restaurant, for example, and the language we use there and the table manners we use there. What is the microculture if we are in McDonald's? More informal, different sorts of table manners. What is it like if we're at a picnic outside? More informal again. We can even run around with food in our hand, but we wouldn't do that in the restaurant. So this idea of language about our genitals or parts of our sexual self, there are different layers to it, and there are different times when different language is going to be appropriate. So my approach is it's okay to use slang as long as there is also the understanding that, yeah, that's slang, but we also have these proper words, and the proper words are really important when you need help or when you're going to see the doctor or when you're asking me if something's wrong, so these two can sit beside each other. So when our children go to school, they're not going like, why the heck is everyone calling their vulva their Mary or their Foofy or their down there or their whatever? They understand that there's different levels of culture. So I feel like I've talked a lot there, but I think the messages are that layering as we go along, not just for the sake of our child, but the sake of ourselves as well, is super important.
Yeah, and I think it's also it's context as well, isn't it? Because it's when I think about what my daughter and her little friends have been saying. So my daughter's 3, for those of you who don't know or listening, and one of her friends who's also 3 just had a baby brother, and they had a home birth, and they were sitting at the table the other night having pizza, and this little boy says to his friends at the table, who are all 3 having pizza, when I turn 4, I'm going to climb back into my mum's vagina and I'm going to stay there for a little while, and then I'm going to come out and I'm going to poo on everyone. And then my daughter says, she says, oh, okay, when I'm 4 and I come out of my mum's vagina, I'm going to wear a nappy and poo in a nappy so I don't get it in everyone. And then they just changed the topic and started talking about something else, completely different, not related to vaginas but I just thought, isn't that nice that a 3-year-old boy knows that a baby comes out of a vagina? And, that's like all they need to know at that age.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to know how it got there yet. It doesn't. I think we get this, I don't know, it was just, there was something really beautiful about that conversation that was, I don't know, I felt like, wow, isn't that great that his family talked about birth with him like that, and that he was in an environment where all these kids are talking about, and all us parents just went, yeah, babies come out of vaginas, sometimes. Like it's
so
having that openness,
isn't it?
Yeah. And then, one of my clients I was talking with today, she said that her son was asking what his testicles were, and she said, well, that's where the seeds are to make the babies. So he had a little chuckle to himself, and he's like, I'm going to make babies with those seeds, and I'm not going to tell my wife, and one day I'm going to surprise her with it. And she's like, oh, okay, well, we need to have another conversation. But it's actually that we're uncomfortable about it, not them.
Yeah, exactly. They love it. They take it on and just run with it. I think it's special. I remember a story a little bit related to this about my discomfort, really, and my kids' openness. So I now am parenting a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and an almost 13-year-old. So I'm way further along the track. But I remember back one Saturday morning, the kids must have been, I don't know, maybe 5, 3, and 1. And we were so tired all the time, just so tired. And it was Saturday morning, and the kids would wake up early, and we'd be like, oh, we live in a multi-story house. So getting up and getting breakfast involved taking everyone downstairs, locking the stair gate so no one could fall, whatever. So sometimes we wouldn't do that. We would bring them all into our room, lock our bedroom door, and we would sort of lie on our bed like going, oh, it's so tiring. And the kids would play around. And this one particular Saturday, they had got into our bedside tables, our little drawers there where we had the condoms, which was our contraceptive method of choice at the time, which I sort of sometimes look back and go, how did we even have the energy to have sex? I'm like, what the hell? Anyway, they'd found the condoms and they were opening it up. They'd opened it up, but unbeknownst to us, because we're sort of lying there with our eyes closed, just listening. You have to listen. And we could hear the ensuite tap running. So I thought, oh no, this is going to be a mess. So I got up to see what was going on. And the 2 older kids had taken condoms out of the wrappers and had put them onto the ensuite basin tap and were filling them up like a water balloon, right? And now, just for context, so everyone needs to understand that I am married to an Irish Catholic, very traditional Irish dude, right? So I'm sort of standing at the ensuite. Keep in mind, I am now a sexuality educator. Standing at the ensuite door going like, John, the kids are filling up condoms within the wash hand basin. Like this, a little bit panicked. And he's going, he says, so? And I'm like, they're condoms. And he's going, yeah, but that's okay, right? And in that moment, something fell from my mind. It was sort of like this awareness, oh, actually, it really is okay. That's a little bit of water on the floor, but that's not bad. Condoms inherently, it's not like they were used condoms. They were fresh from the packet. They were having a laugh. Yes, okay, they looked like a filled up condom with water, as you can imagine, but the kids were happy and playing and joyful. And I think that was the moment when I realized, oh, wow, I have unquestioned sort of beliefs about things to do with sex that I don't even know are there. And it was my very traditional Irish Catholic spouse who really helped me see that really for the first time. And then obviously I embraced it and got on with things. But it just goes to show that kids really they don't have that same filter that we have, which is beautiful and gorgeous. And I sort of describe it as they have a scientist's mind. It's like no preconceived ideas, no sort of, what can I say, influence of religion, unless that's already sort of got to them somehow. But our kids definitely didn't. So they just have that scientist's mind where their brain allows them to explore and learn and grow, and there's nothing holding them back in a sense. So it's one of the greatest, most helpful things as a parent to be able to realize that just because we think something is weird or worrying or scary. They won't at all. They have a fresh and wonderful approach, and they are going to make it easier for us to have these conversations, because just like you say, they're at the table, they're eating pizza, and they're talking about vaginas, and why the hell not, you know?
So adorable. And I also love the way they just change the topic, or just you say something, oh yeah, babies can come out of vaginas. Oh, okay. And then they just move on to something else. It's not, there's no drama in it for them, and there's no you know, and then they might come back and ask a question a few days later or years later and build on that. It's not we have to explain this. So what about when we're talking with older children? Because I feel like this is, you know, the younger years are one thing, it's kind of fun, but then when you're talking, you know, late primary school, early teens, it sort of changes, doesn't it? How do we start talking about it with them then if this is a new thing for our family?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So I have a strategy that I teach parents called the I learned something new today strategy. And basically it's a way to start having conversations when you haven't laid any of the groundwork. So it goes something like this. I learned something new today, that children have a great opportunity to learn all about their body as they're growing up. And even the parts of themselves that adults might have told them are private, you know, or if you feel comfortable using the genitals, you could say genitals, or you could say even the parts of themselves that are to do with sexuality. And then the next part of the way to do this conversation is to apologize, if you feel comfortable apologizing. Now, a parent apologizing to a child is a revolutionarily amazing thing to do, because it sort of challenges that power imbalance that is intrinsic in parenting. Like, the adult is big, they know a lot of stuff, they sort of have control over the child at the end of the day, and then the child knows that, and they're down here trying to muddle along and might want things that their parent doesn't want to give them, and then there's this power tug of war. When you say, I'm sorry, I didn't know this when you were growing up, and so I didn't give you this information, and I'm sorry. Does that wake that child up? Oh my goodness, does it wake them up? Because it's sort of like, wow, my parent is apologizing to me. Like, that seems weird and unusual. So it almost provides an equality in the moment in that conversation. The parent says, you needed this. I'm sorry, I didn't know you needed it, and I haven't given it to you. And then the third part of that is then to invite them into some sort of collaboration. So that will look like saying something like, now, I know you need information that I haven't given to you, and I'm sorry about that. So I would like to find out, what are the best ways for you to get that information? So this is an opportunity to collaborate. That's essentially what you're doing. You're inviting them to give you advice, which again is countercultural in sense of how the power lines run. And then you give them time to think, and you say, so have a think about that, and I'll come back to you maybe today or tomorrow, and we can have a talk about it. So in a sense, you're not hitting your kid with all the information that you realize they should have had and they didn't have, because many of us, actually many of the parents listening, may have had a conversation like that with a parent, because like you've been saying, Layla, in the good old days, no conversations would have happened. And then when a child gets to 9 or 10 or 11 or 12, or they get their period, they sit down and a conversation is happened. It just happens. And what happens is that the child's nervous system has developed over time to believe, well, to understand that we don't talk about this stuff. And then all of a sudden, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, the adult sits them down and just talks at them about all the things that the child didn't think were spoken. And so that can be a real sort of moment of just like, what's going on? Danger, danger, scary, scary. This is wrong. This is bad. Particularly when children develop this thing, I call it the squick factor, but essentially what it is around 8 or 9, children start getting a real ooey around seeing kissing on TV, having conversations about the body with their parents. You haven't done anything wrong if your child is developing this squick factor. It's just part of their growing up. Everyone has it. And it's just unfortunate that it seems to hit right when parents think that these conversations should start. So it's like the perfect storm of a parent wanting to talk and the child's quick factor, and there's this war. And so when you use that system that I've laid out there, which is I learned something new today, the apology, and then the invitation for collaboration, you create this opportunity to work with your child to work out, well, what is the best way going forward, and giving them an opportunity to work that out with you. Because if they're 8, 9, 10, they have the capacity for introspection, and it's a great chance to create connection, because there is not a single parent that I've met that hasn't wanted to feel closer to their child, or who hasn't wanted their child to be able to come to them with problems or questions or worries about the complexities of life. And so this little framework is a great way to start building that connection with your kid about sensitive things.
Well, that's so important too, I think, Sarah, because I think a lot of us think, well, you'll just find out some way. Like, I know I had to go and find out on my own, or you'd learn stuff from friends at school, or but it was okay then, because we weren't using the internet to try and work it out, which we can talk about. But we're sort of left to our own devices. So I think my learning of sex was that it was very much about making babies. And so then I had this huge fear of, like, even if I kissed someone, I'd get pregnant, or, that's where it went. So it wasn't about intimacy or sharing yourself with someone, or, having an expression of yourself with another person or anything like that. But you sort of felt like you couldn't talk about it with your parents, because them doing it was weird. Like, that's weird and ew, I don't want to talk about it with them. So then you're off to go and fight. So I probably did a lot of things that I wouldn't have done if I had a safe place to talk about them, a lot of awkward things. And I probably would have enjoyed sex a lot earlier in my life and been less awkward about it. I remember a girlfriend telling me that her mum said to her, oh, well, you should get an orgasm when you have sex. Like, she told her that was the purpose of sex. And I thought, wow, like, what a different, whereas I thought it was about making babies. So, which it is, but they're both, but some people have sex and never make babies because they don't want babies. And some people have lots of sex because they love having orgasms, and it's awesome, and that's okay too. So we really want our children, I think, to not be going out and looking for it on the internet, and we want them to feel safe to talk about their bodies with us, not just sex, but their bodies.
Yeah. And how do we create permission to do that in our families? This is the question, right? And, well, how do we create a culture for anything in our family as an adult? We model it. We put structure around it. We make sure we do it ourselves so that our children get the hang of it. Like, so for example, in our family movie night would be a thing every Saturday night, and we have a structure around that, and every Saturday it happens. Would that happen if the adults hadn't instigated that? No, it wouldn't, because chaos reigns otherwise, right? So what does it look like for an adult to create the culture that we talk about these things when it comes to bodies and sex? Well, it looks like an adult bringing those things up, bringing up conversations like that. And whether that is listening to a podcast that maybe talks about sex in a way that you feel comfortable your children hearing, so that they realize, oh, people can actually say the word sex in our family, or people can say the word genitals, or we can talk about difficult things like sexual abuse or rape. Like, all those concepts are really high level concepts. And oftentimes, unless a parent has demonstrated that they are comfortable with awkwardness and icky things, a child won't necessarily come and bring up conversations about things that an adult hasn't talked about before. Like I remember, I think my eldest was 8 and we were driving down to the supermarket, and it was during a time in recent Irish history where there was a particular high profile rape case. And so the news came on and the word rape was used, and she was in the back and she says to me, "Mum, what is rape?" Actually, I think she was older than 8. She might have been 10. And so I said, first of all, and so here's the framework again where you look after yourself, where you acknowledge how you're feeling about something, which is, you know what, I wish that I didn't have to talk to you about this word, because in a world where everything worked well, there'd be no such thing as rape. But, rape is where someone is doing something to someone else's genitals or doing something with their genitals to someone else that other person definitely doesn't want, and it was sort of a conversation that could happen because it was like the radio had given her permission to ask the question because the word had been said. Now, you don't have to use radio or podcasts to start conversations like that. You can actually do them if you feel brave and capable enough of doing it by using words like, do you know what? I realize that sometimes children need to ask questions about really tricky things that they don't know what it means, that people might be talking about in the playground at school. And those words could be things like sex, or it could be like another word could be porn, or another word could be rape. So I just want you to let you know that those words, we can talk about those words. And if a conversation like that isn't accessible, then we could put up like Post-it notes. If your child can read, and giving them permission to talk about things, maybe putting up a little Post-it note with the word sex on it and sticking it on the fridge. Your kid is going to go, "Why did you put a Post-it note with the word sex on the fridge?" No matter sort of what age they are, as soon as they can read. And you can say, "Well, do you know what I've realized? That the world doesn't often talk to kids about that word. And I want to let you know that in this house, we talk about that word. So that's why the Post note is there." And then they can go, "Okay, well, I've got the message now. Can you please take it down?" Right? Yeah. But at least that is one opportunity of giving child permission, of showing them that we talk about these things. And there are multiple other ways we can do that in our house. But it's that connection piece that you're talking about, that sort of giving them permission to start conversations or come to us with questions or problems or difficulties, that is just so important. And the sooner that we can find a way that works for us and works for our child, that gives them permission to say those things, the sort of the better off we're going to be. It's like that old adage, like when is the best time to plant an oak tree? And people say, "Well, when is the best time?" You say, "Well, 20 years ago." When's the next best time? Today. Or put that Post note up that says sex on your fridge today.
Yeah. It's just, that was really powerful what you said, especially talking about rape, because that's a full-on topic. And my heart kind of sank when you said that, because yes, I'm going to have to talk about that with my daughter one day. But I do hope,
well, I just wanted to say this important thing, that I think sometimes parents, they have this idea of our job is to protect our kids, right? That is a parent's job at the end of the day. But oftentimes protection is sometimes mistaken for sort of keeping them ignorant or lack of information. Whereas protection in my world, working in this world, is giving them information or understanding about complex topics, so they're not surprised or shocked, so that they have information that allows them to negotiate the world and know they have a parent at their back, and know where they can go to for help with things that feel overwhelming. So it's like things that feel dangerous for us to talk about are actually the things that we need to actively wade into the relationship we have with our child, in a way that we can sort of gather them into our arms and say a word like rape that just feels so wrong, and like all of us wish that we lived in a world where that didn't happen and we didn't have to have this conversation.
Well, I think it comes down to, as well, starting with that place, right, getting really comfortable with your own body. Because when you are comfortable with your own body, you can set boundaries around it, so it's not protecting them from rape, because they're different. This, like you were coming back to that thing about consent, right? Mm. When I know what is good for me and I'm comfortable with myself, it's easier for me to put a boundary up around that. And so I might have to be able to say, for instance, if something's done to you that you'll have shame about talking about, you might never talk about it, and then it might happen to you again, or so if I'm uncomfortable with talking about my vagina, I might never say to someone, I went out with that guy and I went out with him and he didn't give me permission, but I didn't give him permission, but he touched me there, but I don't want to talk about it because I can't talk about my vagina. To me, it feels like that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of permissions we need to be either given as a child or give ourselves as an adult. Like permission, let me think off the top of my head, a few of them would be permission to notice or what our body is saying to us or what we need, right? So first of all, we have to notice it somehow. Most of us aren't taught how to do that. That's why your work is so sort of central, that, that little voice we have inside our head or little sensation that we might feel in our chest or in our abdomen that says this doesn't feel right. So permission to pay attention to those sensations, then permission to speak up about them, right? Because a lot of us will have been conditioned to put someone else's comfort ahead of our own comfort or safety or whatever it is. So speak up about them. And then the third thing would be that when we speak up about it, the other person isn't heard, it doesn't hear us, that the third thing would be to take a stand about it and say, well, I have this need. I've said it to you. You haven't listened. Well, now I need to plant both my feet in the ground and be an immovable force, which for some of us may feel incredibly foreign. I just know for myself, it has taken me a really long time to do those three things. And I'm in my late 40s now. So I think for a lot of my 20s, I don't think I had the skills to even pay attention to my body. I didn't know if, when I was being kissed by someone, my body would tell, I think back to it now and go, yeah, my body would tell me that I didn't really want to do it, but I would stay there because I didn't understand what then that sensation was. And this wasn't rape or sexual abuse or anything like this. This was generally someone I wanted to kiss, being kissed by them, thinking, oh, actually, no, don't really want this anymore, but not understanding that I could then stop that kiss happening. It was almost like, well, I'm in it now. I've never really been told that or shown how you negotiate that sort of situation, particularly, I think, because I never learnt that I was allowed to speak up for myself in all other areas of life. So the ability to speak up, it's not just in our sexual part of our life, it's in everything, right? It's in everything. It's like, do we say to the waiter when he comes over, and how was your food? Do we say, oh, it's great, thanks? Or do we say, well, actually, wasn't that great? Actually, the rice was undercooked and the steak was tough. So those three things of being able to notice what our body is saying to us, what we need, being able to speak up for us and then ourselves, and then being an immovable force when someone doesn't actually hear us the first time, is building blocks that we can be putting in place for our children, or giving them opportunities to learn how to do those things from an early age. Now, a toddler does not need to learn how to be an immovable force.
But they already are.
They got that down.
Just have a tantrum in the middle of the supermarket. It's got it. You're not moving that toddler.
Yeah.
No matter how embarrassed you are.
Yeah. Oh, so funny.
Because there's so much to learn at each age of each child. And I think, I love what you say about going, I'm sorry, I didn't know this. Because so often we think that we have to be the knowledgeable person. But then when I think back to I don't want to talk to a know-all all the time anyway. I want to talk to a real human who's got mistakes and things like that. So, I really hope that this conversation has opened up for people to start thinking about things differently. I guess the first thing I want people to think about is your body is not just for sex. So, our penis or our vagina and how it functions and what it smells like, what comes out of it, all these things can actually be a sign of health and nothing to do with sex. So we can remove a lot of shame from that to not have anything to do with sex. But I think that the part for kids is if we learn about those parts of our body as being functional, like you said, it's like your digestive system or your nervous system. Like if we learn about them being functional first and foremost, we can get connected with ourselves, and then sex comes after that, because sex is an expression of ourselves when we know who we really are, right? Or getting to know ourselves with someone that we trust, or just having heaps of fun. With no shame around it.
I was thinking about the whole thing about sex and sexuality the other day, because oftentimes parents will come up to me and say, they've got this concern, and valid concern, because of the way what the messages the world tells us, that if we talk to kids about their body, particularly their genitals, that we're in some way going to be sexualizing them or giving them a sexuality, which is obviously wrong, because in our world, the only thing we know about children and sex most of the time is child sexual abuse, right? So there isn't any conversation that really happens about the fact, well, actually, children do have a sexuality. And the analogy I thought of the other day was, it's like when our children are born newborns, we look at them and we go, okay, well, if you look in their mouth when they're breastfeeding, do they have any teeth? As a general rule, they don't. You can't see any teeth. But do they actually have teeth? They do have teeth. And all the teeth and the teeth buds are in their bones, just ready and be developing slowly erupt. When they're whatever age they are, 6 months, they might get their first tooth, and more teeth come up. And then when they're 6 years, adult teeth start to come up, which they're going to have for their whole life. And I think that's actually a beautiful analogy for our sexual selves, in the sense that when we are born, just like our tooth buds, we have a certain sexual self there that is going to slowly develop over time, right? And so while we might get to our late teens or maybe early 20s, or maybe never at all, before we have fully fledged sexual sharing experience of our body with someone else, or maybe just with ourselves, or whatever our sexual path is. There are the buds and the beginnings of that from when we are born. And so I don't know how some parents feel about that, but for many of the parents I work with, it gives them a massive amount of permission to be able to have these conversations that lay the foundations for, this amazing adult sexual self, whatever it looks like. Because just like when our children are getting their first teeth, and we will be cleaning them in the bath, and they're only 6 months old or 7 months old, and we sort of help them do that. In the same way, there are things that we have that we can do to support our children to care for their developing sexual self, so that when they get older, everything's in place. And what you're saying there about tuning into genitals and how do we care for our genitals, what do we call them, the fact that they feel nice and they're meant to feel nice, all those things are the gift we give our child to give them the foundations for their developing sexual self. So it's a lot. I like that picture of it's just another way we support them to grow into a healthy, wonderful adult, by giving them this sort of acceptance of all the parts of themselves, including their sexuality, their ability to talk about all parts of themselves, including their genitals or the sexual parts of their body, the ability to make decisions and discover sensations in their body about all the different parts of themselves, including their sexual self, right? So I can feel my face looking really happy when I think about this idea of how, isn't it a great privilege to raise our children, all the parts of our children, and not truncating or pushing aside one part of their development, that it all is in this package. And there are basic, simple things we can do from the very beginning to put the steps and the skills and the knowledge and the abilities in place so that when they get to their older self, that they know how to drive their vulva or drive their penis so it feels good, and they know what a thrush infection looks like, so they're not afraid about it, and they understand what is the best way to manage their period for themselves, even though it might be different to someone else. And they understand that even though there are lots of people in the world that feel weird and awkward about this part of being human, they don't feel that. And, that is a great privilege and great skill set and great honor to have a well-rounded sense of yourself as a human being, which includes the sexual self.
That's such a beautiful way to close off this interview, Sarah, because I think you've just summed it all up there. It's a huge part of ourselves, and we can't omit any part of ourselves from the whole picture of taking care of ourselves and being who we are. And there's going to be varying degrees of it, right? Like some people are going to be more sexual than other people, and that's okay too, because we don't have to just look at those parts of ourselves as sexual. They have other functions as well that are okay to talk about in a non-sexual way. I had so many more questions I wanted to ask you, but I think I know you have to go and you've got lots of stuff on in your busy schedule. I'm so grateful that we can make this happen all the way across the world. So please, everyone, Sarah, please tell everyone about your courses and your website so they can get in touch with you.
Instagram is actually my happy place. I am Sarah Sproule on Instagram, and there is always a link in my bio there for whatever I'm doing at the time. I run a course for parents. I have a free course that I do usually twice a year, but the link will be in my bio, whatever that is. And if that's not running, I have a podcast. I call it a mini podcast, actually, in fairness, because compared to Leela, yours is rich and long and deep. Mine is a mini pod of 8 minutes a week where I answer one question from a parent about something very practical about conversations about bodies, puberty, sex, all the things. And it's advice that is simple and actionable and fast. So that's essentially me. And thank you so much for inviting me on your really awesome pod. I really sort of feel honored to.
Oh, thank you. No, and you have to. I think there's a really big space for your type of podcast for people who just want to sit and listen. So don't ever say that your podcast is little compared to mine. No way. There's so much information and so much action in those 8 minutes, and I love those little posts.
I think, I designed it that way because as a parent, I just know, I do not have time for really long things. And when I started the podcast, I actually did it. I would take one of my sons to boxing. He would be there for an hour, and I would sit in the car. That's why it's called sitting in a car. I love it. Sit in the car and record maybe 2 or 3 episodes in an hour. And I just thought, well, if this is the only way I can do it, this might actually be the only way some parents can listen to it because their life is so structured and busy. So that's how it ended up. But I really
that's so awesome. You know what? I thought it was called sitting in a car because you were going off to the car to have a private conversation by yourself because you couldn't have that private conversation with everyone else, because that's what we do. Actually, do this call in the car. So I thought it was something else completely different.
Yeah, and you know what? Other people say that it's called sitting in a car because oftentimes the car is the only place where we can have conversations with children, because they're sort of there and we're going somewhere and it's a moment in time and they can't jump out or whatever. So there are so many reasons why in parenting, sitting in a car is so important and useful and dear to our hearts. So yeah, I love it.
So tune into Sarah's little pod, everybody. It's sitting in a car. I love it. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Oh, thanks, Leila.
I'm Leila Lutz, and you've been listening to The Body Never Lies. If you haven't yet, please go to your favourite podcast app and subscribe, rate and review this podcast. All the resources and references from this episode are waiting for you on my website, leilalutz.com. Just click on podcast and look for this episode. Now join me next week for another episode of The Body Never Lies. Thank you so much for listening.